Embrace, extend, extinguish, a phrase once used by Microsoft's executive suite to describe their strategy of weakening and consuming the competition. While Microsoft may have a well-established reputation for anti-competitive ruthlessness, they've also been waging a war against the IRS for decades. They owe $29 billion to America, about $87 per person, because Microsoft has been evading taxes for years. Here's how.
The key to success is developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers. Developers, developers, developers,
So, in the beginning, there was a man called Ronald Reagan. Maybe you've heard of him. Reagan led the American economy down the path of deregulation. For better or worse, this is what he did. And Bush 1, Clinton Prime, and Bush 2 beta only continued that general trend. By the mid-2000s, it had become normal for corporations to use softer regulations to their advantage, and nowhere more so but in concealing and shielding their financial assets. This continues, with the exact cost to the taxpayer obscure. You might have heard of companies doing something like this forever. There's ways of avoiding tax legally, such as Company A establishes or controls Company B, and then sells services to Company B or vice versa for overinflated costs, so that Company A can look like it's made little taxable income, and Company B looks like it's operating on a loss, or some variation of that. Perhaps simpler, and yet requiring a full complement of accountants, contract lawyers, and people who are happy to come into the office on Saturday to sign something, is Company A sending profits through a Byzantine route of ownership and stakeholders to any country with a very low corporation tax that would have them as Company A star. Terms and conditions apply. And this is what Microsoft did, but unlike Google, it didn't funnel its money into a not a subsidiary, totally a parent company in Ireland, which had the lowest tax rate in Europe, but rather it stayed where it was and bent local government to its will. In 1989, Microsoft launched subsidiaries in Switzerland, Brazil, Israel, Belgium, and Puerto Rico. Operating in Puerto Rico, Microsoft benefited from tax credits and saved $200 million over 14 years. There, in the small city of Humacao, they employed less than 100 people to burn Windows CDs. But the tax credit that had made this attractive in 1989 was due to end in 2005, so by 2003, Microsoft was making paper moves to exit Puerto Rico. Then Microsoft head of international taxation, Glenn Cogswell, recognized that if Microsoft was to stay in Puerto Rico, they would need to aggressively restructure their finances, but thought this idea was too impractical. But KPMG, one of the biggest corporate account advisory companies in the world, with $34 billion in revenue last year, convinced Microsoft to go ahead and restructure, and that it helped corporations do this all the time. Puerto Rico is a polity. It is not a state, but a territory in the United States. The people there are US citizens, but cannot vote in presidential elections, and have limited rights compared to states-born citizens. It is often entirely excluded from national statistics or state-by-state comparisons, and I would argue it's attractive to villains of various ilk because it is at least perceived as a federal blind spot. In the early 2000s, Puerto Rican corporate tax was especially enticing compared to other countries, but KPMG sold Microsoft on siphoning money to Puerto Rico because they had connections with government officials in San Juan, the territory's capital. KPMG's service is accounting and financial advice, but its real product is influence. They employ more than 250,000 people across more than 140 countries. And boy, did they use their influence here. The deal was that Puerto Rico's Secretary of State would guarantee a tax for Microsoft of just 0 to 2% for 15 years if, and it was a big if, they pulled out all the stops and hired at least another 46 people. 46 people. 3 million people live in Puerto Rico. Now, I'm no big city lawyer or nothing, but I would have thought that with the tax rate being 35% at the time in the US, Microsoft paying up to 2% for 46 jobs isn't a great deal. I can't prove it, but surely the Secretary of State of Puerto Rico and other government officials took a bribe, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. Speaking of bullshit, YouTube has started to put mid-roll ads in the middle of my videos without telling me, and when they do that, I allege, they keep all the money. So, I put forward, I might as well do that myself and make $17 from this mid-roll ad. Sorry. That looked good, didn't it? Yeah, I'll be sure to buy one of those. So, with their favourable tax rate of up to 2%, Microsoft needed a way of shifting its profits to its own Puerto Rican subsidiary so that it could pay 2% instead of 35%. In reality, it paid closer to 0. Microsoft had its entire CD production centralized in Puerto Rico and had the subsidiary buy the exclusive rights from them. These rights allowed the subsidiary to collect a portion of all Microsoft sales in the US. At the same time, the subsidiary bought licenses and other non-things to make it seem like they were a multi-billion-dollar company. But the game was shielding profits with this license agreement. This way, Microsoft was able to pay near zero tax on $39 billion, rather than the 35% it would have paid had it not done this. KPMG's surely nominal fee was not only earned by them leveraging the kleptocrats in San Juan. KPMG anticipated eventual government scrutiny, and they did their best to keep their plans with Microsoft offline and in person, and they created a deliberately complicated circle of bureaucracy around what Microsoft's subsidiary actually was. The IRS began an investigation into Microsoft in 2007. In 2010, the IRS announced that it was creating a new unit to audit international intra-company deals. In 2011, it completed an audit of Microsoft, but then withdrew its findings in early 2012. Some IRS agents believed Microsoft was committing major fraud, and they expanded their investigation to thousands of documents and hundreds of Microsoft employees. Then, in May of 2014, they signed a contract with a private law firm for the first time ever for $2.2 million. Quinn Emanuel, which describes itself as a global litigation colossus without equal. Microsoft had probably expected to deal with just fine IRS agents asking about remainders and forms, but instead, the IRS brought in John Gordon, ex-US attorney and partner at Quinn Emanuel. This rattled Microsoft, as did the IRS's subsequent summons of Steve Ballmer, numerous Microsoft executives, and KPMG lackeys. They fought as hard as they could against the IRS, specifically trying to attack their use of an outside contractor. One of Microsoft's attorneys even argued that the IRS should not use expensive contract lawyers because they know how to win, and that's very different from the usual IRS mission of compromise. They formally objected to outside attorneys working with the IRS at every opportunity, even suing the IRS several times to obtain documents specifically about the hiring. Microsoft was, luckily for the people of Utah, one of the biggest contributors to then-Senator Orrin Hatch. In 2015, they got him to send a letter to IRS leadership demanding they cease their use of outside counsel. But the judge in the Microsoft versus paying taxes case wasn't swayed. The legal back and forth went on and on and on. Then, in 2020, the judge ruled the court finds itself unable to escape the conclusion that a significant purpose, if not the sole purpose, of Microsoft's transactions was to avoid or evade federal income tax. But it wasn't until October 2023 that Microsoft publicly announced, and by announced I mean quietly said to itself in a busy bus station, that the audit part of the audit was over, and that the IRS had issued it with a $28.9 billion bill for back taxes and penalties for its Puerto Rico gig from 2004 to 2013. A win, somewhat, but Microsoft promises to appeal and appeal and appeal for as long as it can, and has already assured this cannot happen again. In late 2015, it helped to found the Coalition for Effective and Efficient Tax Administration, or CETA, essentially a business interest group. They hired PwC, a top lobbying firm. PwC wanted Congress to curtail the IRS's ability to block appeals, limit their ability to summon witnesses, and stop them from using outside law firms like Quinn Emanuel. Their angle was more or less, how can a small business go up against the IRS when they have $1,000 an hour lawyers? Just to reiterate, the IRS hired an outside law firm for this case alone because Microsoft was so massive and uncooperative. So, the Taxpayer First Act passed in July 2019. It bars the IRS from using an outside attorney to question witnesses and dilutes the agency's ability to issue summonses or block appeals, all things it rarely did and almost exclusively did when it was dealing with international corporations that weren't playing fair. Now I know what you're thinking, George, I can't buy anything for $30 billion, I can't even buy a social media platform, it is a pittance. Well, this is just a tiny view of a much bigger petri dish. Speaking to Fortune magazine in 2022, Mitchell Peterson, a finance professor at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, estimates that US corporations have almost $6 trillion shielded from tax. On top of that, there's another estimated $4 trillion held by US individuals overseas. And on top of all that, Microsoft's effective tax rate still remains a mystery in their own filings. 18% as of 2022, up from 15%, according to one SEC document, 13% down from 14% in another. Microsoft isn't even the worst. Between 2018 and 2021, Amazon had an effective tax rate of 5.1%. Tesla's effective tax rate was 8% in 2022. That year, Pfizer's was 9.6%. Alphabet's was 16.2%. I bet you'd love to pay that rate. I think it's important to note that not all big companies are paying such low taxes. Walmart pays a rate of about 25%, and JP Morgan's effective tax rate is about 33%. But these don't include any holdings, offshore or otherwise, that the taxman simply doesn't know about. Microsoft led the charge against an already weakened foe. They didn't quite gut it, the taxman will still have questions for you, and for small and medium businesses too, but the rules have been clarified. The biggest companies are not to be annoyed. After all, the politicians have their donation quotas to fill and their pockets to line. Do you want legalized robber barons plundering this country? Because this is how you get it. I think it's a sad indictment, outrageous and pathetic, that so many people from both major political parties, the majority, can get behind a bill that purely benefits corporations, evading taxes, stealing from the people of America, because the IRS is too powerful. I'm not going to mince my words. Democracy, my arse. The people at the top, the government, the legislators, they're all bought and paid for. Well, thanks very much for watching. See you next week, if I survive. Stay safe. Or don't, go crazy, whatever.